Cold and beautiful, Canada is a place of great people, big moose, and terrifying encounters. From creepy people who should probably be locked away, to terrifying humanoid creatures and haunted places, these are allegedly true and scary stories from Canada. If you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. We're looking for scary dog walking stories and food delivery app stories. Also, if you want to listen to the show audio only, follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on iTunes and Spotify. And if you don't mind, could you help us reach 2,000 reviews on iTunes? We're so close. Just search for Darkness Prevails podcast on iTunes, or click the link in the description. Thank you. Now, let's begin. Warning. The following story contains graphic imagery of dead animals and criminal behavior. Skiing Nightmare. From justslimeystuff. I was a female 8-year-old amateur skier during the time of this story. It was early January during winter break in Ontario 2007. My family had decided there was nothing better to do than to take a skiing trip to our local mountain. My brother, who was around 6, and I could not be more excited. We arrived at the mountain, and the first thing I remember thinking was how much I wanted to impress the older familiar kids by skiing all by myself. My parents were taking forever to put their gear on, and since my brother and I were already ready to go, I started begging my mom to let us go alone. She was iffy and a bit uncomfortable, but eventually allowed my brother and I to go down one hill by ourselves, as long as we met back up with her at the bottom. When we got to the top, I of course wanted to go down one of the more advanced hills. However, my brother was still a beginner, so we both decided to go down a small hill called Bunny Lump, or something silly like that. There was a large group of kids in front of us, so I thought we should hang back for a bit, so I could speed up and show off my new skills to my brother. Once the other kids were out of sight, I zoomed down about 7 meters and stopped quickly, with my skis parallel. I was impressed with myself, but when I looked up to see my brother's reaction, he was instead staring into the forest next to the hill. It was a pretty vast forest, and even though there was a rope separating it from the hill, it would be very easy for my brother to duck under it. I scanned the edge of the forest, looking desperately for whatever or whoever had stolen my brother's attention. At first, I thought it was an animal, but when my brother's eyes widened, I knew something was wrong. I yelled for him, but he would not budge. I threw my skis off, stuck them into the snow, and tried to run up the hill. Of course, if you've ever worn ski boots, you know how hard it can be to walk, let alone sprint. I made it about halfway before I saw what my brother was staring at. The sight of it brought tears to my eyes. It was a man dressed with a fur hat, a Canada Goose jacket, baggy jeans, and Converse. It was strange enough to have a man wearing Converse this high up the hill, but what was even weirder was that he was holding something. In his right hand, there were 2 dead gerbils. It looked as if someone had trampled over them, so much that they were barely recognizable. His other hand was down his pants. Back then, I thought he was just putting his hand in his pocket, but now I know better. I froze in that spot, just like my brother, and the creep snickered. Or maybe it was a giggle, revealing his teeth that surprisingly weren't in that bad of shape. But his lips were a different story. They cracked open and blood piled to the splits as he smiled. He had a goatee, which added to the grossness. "Funny, funny, right, little girl?" he said to me, bouncing the gerbils in his hand as if they were juggling balls. My brother began to cry, and just then, an adult skier came down with his preteen son. They stopped, and they asked if we were okay. I was so embarrassed. I just nodded really quickly. By then, the creepy man was gone, so I led my brother down and snapped my skis on. My brother and I zoomed to the bottom. When we met back up with my mother, we told her, but she thought we were exaggerating. She probably didn't want to end our one ski trip over some weirdo in the woods. So she told us that the man was gone now, and we continued our trip. Although I didn't meet him again while skiing, while I was on my final run on the same hill, I looked into the forest and I could see him running alongside me. I passed him, and after that I was done for the day. I didn't tell my mother about that one, so the situation was never reported, and I never really spoke about it again, besides telling friends. This goes to show you there really are some freaks out there, even if I do sound dramatic. It may not sound that bad, but for me it was definitely a life-scarring moment. Thankfully, my brother barely remembers, but it will forever stay ingrained in my mind. Encounter with Something Dark, from gregamb. I'll start this story by stating that I'm not sure if this was an evil human spirit or something demonic while visiting an abandoned farm and house. This encounter occurred in 2018 while visiting my girlfriend in her reserve in Canada. One day during the summer, we were getting a bit bored and thought about checking out a farm that seemed to be abandoned on the outskirts of her reservation. This seemingly abandoned cattle farm property contained a dilapidated house with 5 sheds that I counted, and while approaching the house, I stopped in my tracks while my girlfriend approached it. She asked what was wrong. I told her it was nothing, but the truth was I had this sense of being watched, and it was coming from a certain area behind a shed. We entered the house as it wasn't locked and slowly made our way in, making plenty of noise should any animals be using it as a den. So far it seemed to be empty. We explored it, being careful we didn't fall through the floor, seeing how the flooring on the main floor was caving in, as well as the floor upstairs, and the basement was on the verge of being collapsed in. After checking out the house for a while, we decided to roam around the property. We went over to where some old chicken coops were, and once again I sensed us being watched. I went on ahead while my girlfriend and her niece were examining these chicken coops. We soon made our way back towards the house, examining the nearby sheds. Upon checking a fairly small shed, it appeared as if it was used recently, despite the area seemingly being abandoned. In fact, we found some dried blood that seemed to be recent, based on the texture of it. Then we called it a day and made our way back home, talking about how creepy the place seemed to be. We went to get changed in her bedroom into more comfortable clothes, and before we got changed, we immediately noticed in the center of the floor there was a very old, dry eggshell, just like one of the ones we saw in the chicken coops we looked at. We looked towards each other, confused and a bit creeped out. There was no reason for that eggshell to be there. We didn't eat in this room. We went to check if we might have left a trail of dried eggshells on the way to the bedroom and into the house, and found nothing of the sort. We thought about that all day, trying to think about how these eggshells would get here, but we didn't have an explanation. We lied down for a while, trying to sleep. Just when we were about to doze off, a plastic bag we had on the door from shopping earlier sounded like it was being kicked or moved with a lot of force. My girlfriend turned on her phone flashlight. We were looking for mice, yet the house didn't have any, and after finding nothing, we fell asleep, despite being a bit weirded out. In the middle of the night, something woke us up. I could hear scratching coming from the corner of the room. I told my girlfriend to pass me her phone. It was 3 a.m. when I looked at it. I turned on the flashlight, expecting to see a mouse, or maybe hoping to see one, maybe even a squirrel that got into the house somehow. But once again, I saw nothing. I started to bang on the walls, then stopped, waiting to hear something scurrying around inside, but there was no response. I decided to use the voice recorder on her phone, just to see if we'd get a response if it wasn't an animal. By then, I was wondering if it was a ghost. With the recorder on, out loud, I asked, "Is that you I heard just now?" I waited in silence with my girlfriend sitting up on the bed. She was quiet too. We waited for any sort of sign or response for a while, until finally I played back the recording.
"Is that you I heard just now?" "Yes."
A raspy and evil-sounding voice replied with a yes, and it sounded louder than me in the recording. The look on my girlfriend's face told me she heard it too. We played it back again just to confirm it. We eventually went back to bed, despite being extremely creeped out, realizing that something probably followed us back home. When I woke up the next morning, while alone, I told whatever it was in the house that followed us to leave the house and to go back where it came from, and we promised not to return there. Using some religious provocation, I commanded it in the name of Jesus to leave this house and to leave us alone, renouncing any ties we may have had with it, knowingly or unknowingly, when we ventured onto that property. After doing so, the house felt lighter, and there was no longer any sense of dread. After that, we never had any more paranormal activity happen. And because of that encounter, I decided not to explore any more seemingly abandoned places, despite my curiosity for urban exploration, or what I like to call rural exploration. Warning: the following story contains depictions of animal devourment. A crawler is terrorizing my friend's neighborhood. From Yebonyang. So, very recently, on November 17th, my friend told me he's been seeing something strange. Something he thinks is a crawler cryptid. At first, when he told me, I didn't believe him, but I soon realized he wasn't joking. He told me about the experience in a very detailed manner. I won't give the exact location, but it's somewhere in southern Ontario. Here's his story, written from his perspective. Saturday, November 15th was the first time I saw the creature. I live in a suburban area with separate housing and a forest and 2 ponds very near my house. Between each of the houses, there's a little space, kind of like an alley, that connects to a forest. I was playing with my grandpa somewhere in the evening on the sidewalk when I spotted 2 giant white glowing eyes staring back at me from one of the alleys. I couldn't see the whole creature, but its eyes were 4 feet off the ground, a little shorter than me. Whatever the thing was, it let out a growl. I'd watched enough horror films to know not to go and investigate, so I ran back to my house, my grandpa following behind me. We both got inside and I slammed the door, but before he could ask what was up, I rushed upstairs and I looked outside, but I could not find the creature. I didn't dismiss it. Instead, I just stayed in my room for the rest of the night. About an hour later, I was reading in my room when I looked out the window. From where I was, I saw a large creature running across the road, partially hidden from sight. It was tall, just under 7 feet tall. It was pale too, and its fingers were 2 times longer than my middle fingers. It had claws and large glowing eyes, with a small slit for a mouth. I remember then my sister coming into my room and asking me, "Why's that tall dude running on the road like that?" The following day, I was awake at 6 a.m. when I saw the same creature crawling across the pavement. After school, I was walking my dog when once again I spotted the creature. It was eating what appeared to be a coyote at the edge of the forest. You'd better believe I got the heck out of there. What do I even do in this situation? My childhood home, from Ethereal Stardust. I'll start off by saying that I'm now a 22-year-old woman. At the time of these incidents, I was between the ages of 6 and 11, living in a very small community in southern Ontario, Canada. The house that I grew up in wasn't in the best shape, being built by my poppy on a limited budget. Something always felt off about the house, the small 4-stalled barn, and the rest of the property. This is the first incident that I can remember clearly. I refused to sleep in my nanny's room after she passed away when I was 3. It never felt right, and I always felt uncomfortable in that room, so I would sleep on the couch in the living room instead. That's what I was trying to do one night when I heard quiet footsteps in our basement. Then they were on the stairs, and loud, because those stairs were uncovered and they were more like a ladder. I saw the basement door open, and I ducked down into the couch more to try and hide from the terrifying figure that emerged from the basement. All I could see was black. No face, no eyes, arms, legs, nothing. Just a black hooded figure in a long black robe or cloak. This figure stood there for a good minute, staring at my hiding spot as if he already knew where I was. Then, without a sound, it started walking to the last door on the left at the end of the hallway, my nanny's room. The figure disappeared from sight, and I never saw it in my house again. But that doesn't mean I never saw it again. It was my job to take care of the chickens, so every morning around 6:30 I would head out to the backyard and down the hill to tend to them. On my way there, I'd have to pass the old barn. It hadn't been used in a good 10 or 15 years due to disrepair, so I wasn't expecting to see movement coming from that area one morning. I took a quick look over in that direction, but I stopped in my tracks, and I immediately felt as if I was going to be sick, because there was the hooded figure again. It was standing 30 feet away in the doorway to the barn that even our 2 Jersey cows wouldn't go near. Oddly enough, they avoided that place like the plague. I stared at it, and it stared at me, and as soon as I feel tears of fear starting to make themselves known, the figure slowly turns and walks into the darkness of the barn. That was the last time I've encountered that hooded figure, but not the last strange event from my childhood home. The remaining stories are from older episodes, but they match today's topic, and new viewers might like them. Enjoy. Lac Wendigo, submitted by Ava C. This is a scary experience we had in Algonquin Park in Canada, where we got stuck on a road called Lac Wendigo. My family and I were camping up north for some time, but sadly after 6 days we had to leave. We left early in the morning, around 8. I was with 3 people, my mother Cindy and my 2 cousins Cheryl and Samantha. As we were driving, my mother, being the outdoorsy type, wanted Cheryl to drive through her favorite place, Algonquin Provincial Park. It was simply gorgeous. I was 8 the last time we went, so I hadn't remembered much, and I was excited to go. I was too busy taking photos to realize Cheryl had turned down a road with the name Lac Wendigo. It was a very narrow, eerie road. We stopped a few times to have a snack and take some pictures. "I've got to turn around," Cheryl said as she looked for a wide spot to turn. The only problem was, there was nothing but a narrow path. She ended up having to unhook our trailer and back up until she could turn around. In the meantime, black flies and deer flies swarmed all over our car. It got so bad that we had to roll the windows up. Even then, all you could hear was tapping on the glass from the flies ramming into it. Cheryl was finally able to turn her car around, but she had to back up to get the trailer. Both Cheryl and Samantha were panicking. Their faces were both suddenly filled with dread. Everyone got out of the car in a hurry. They were suddenly trying to get the trailer back on the vehicle as fast as they possibly could, and I couldn't understand what the hurry was about. But in no time, they had the thing hooked back up. Then I heard Cheryl curse under her breath as she got back in. They made a point to lock the doors and check that the windows were all the way up. Then we sped out of there, and I swear we were going so fast, I thought we'd lose control at any second. The whole time this was happening, a feeling of being watched was coming over me, and just as we were taking off, that feeling was at its strongest. So I couldn't hold back anymore. I turned around in my seat and looked out the back window, and behind me stood something that I'd never forget. There was a tall creature. It looked almost like a moose, but it was standing on its hind legs. It had these solid black eyes with an expression of anger on its face. It stared back at me with those beady black eyes, and I knew if we had stayed there any longer, we may have never left, at least not alive. I tried later to get an explanation from my family, but they never spoke a word, and ever since then, I've had nightmares about that thing. The Monster in Northern Canada. Submitted by Ryan. I'm a 17-year-old guy that lives in northern Minnesota back in the States. I consider myself muscular. I weigh around 200 pounds and I go to the gym every morning. I'm not too prideful to admit that I might be pretty cocky sometimes, but I'm not easily scared. Anyway, every summer, my friend and I drive up to Bishoe Lake in Alberta. We usually go fishing in our little boat, and that's what we were doing that day. We just got done fishing, and we were driving our fishing boat back to the cabin. My friend Zach stops the boat all of a sudden and starts clenching his ears. It's obvious, and I look over at him and ask, "Hey, you okay, man?" He responds with, "What on earth was that noise? Tell me you heard that." Confused, I answered, while looking around at the surrounding lake. "No, what did it sound like?" He looks around for about 10 seconds, then responds, "It was this super high-pitched howl. It sounded like it was right next to me, but now it's gone." So he starts the boat back up, and we drive back to the cabin undisturbed. A few hours later, we are playing the new Call of Duty together in the living room, when something that sounded like a rock hit our window. We both jump up, and Zach yells, "What was that?" Then he goes to check it out. I'm sitting on the couch and I tell him, "It's probably just some bird, man, just finish the game with me." So he walks away from the window and just sits down, and we start playing again. By then it's about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and we're still playing our game, when out of nowhere, we hear this god-awful high-pitched howl, and almost instantly, as goosebumps envelop my skin, I realize this must have been the sound he was talking about. The sound blares from just outside our cabin. Zach screams, "That was the noise!" as we both run to the window and look outside to find nothing. Then Zach, who is fed up with whatever this prankster is doing, grabs a kitchen knife and runs out the front door, yelling, "Whoever's out there, come here and show yourself, this isn't funny." I get up and run outside with him looking around. I wanted to be sure he didn't hurt someone in his anger. The next thing we saw is something I never thought I'd witness in my life, and I honestly can't believe I'm saying it now, because it sounds like I'm an escaped patient from a mental hospital. But I know what I saw, and it will forever haunt me. There's an elk standing at the forest's edge outside, and we watch in silence and in awe as the elk stands up on its hind legs, letting out that same horrific high-pitched howl, the exact noise we had just heard. Right away, we both make a beeline for the truck. It was parked in the driveway to our right, and Zach hops in the passenger seat. I jump into the driver's seat and dig around in my pocket for the keys. First things first, I lock all the doors. I finally find the keys and shove them into the ignition. I pound my foot on the gas, zipping down the driveway and turning down the dirt road to zoom away. Once we have the guts to, Zach and I both look back at the cabin and see that that thing is gone. Then we look at each other, speechless. To this day, I think what we saw was a skinwalker, a shaman or spirit that can take the form of animals, but not perfectly. I've heard the legends before, and I honestly never put an ounce of truth into them, but this experience, it's confirmed so much for me. But I'm still terrified, and I know I wasn't hallucinating, because Zach and I both saw it. To all of you listening or reading, just know there are things out there, and it doesn't always have to make sense. The Beast of the Canadian Woods, submitted by Felix M. This story happened to my grandfather back when he was a teenager. He and his girlfriend, now my grandmother, had just had a nasty fight and broke up, which devastated him. His dad decided that sometime doing his favorite thing might cheer him up, and so they went camping. This had my grandfather up and about the second he heard about it, because camping has been and always will be one of his most passionate hobbies. My grandfather mentioned that when they were driving to the campsite, he had this unbreakable feeling that something was off. He later realized that once they drove past a certain point, he had stopped hearing any animals from the wilderness around him. No birds, no sight of the occasional moose, nothing. Fast forward to later when they were at the campsite. Now, it wasn't just him and his father there at the campsite. There was an Indian family that was camping not far from them, and they even shared a dinner with them and swapped stories. It was later that night when everything started to happen. My grandfather woke up inside the tent they had set up with the urge to, make a pit stop. So he quickly unzipped the tent and dashed into the woods, flashlight in hand. He made his way a while from the campsite as to not stink up the air, and he did his business. Now, as he started walking back, he realized that he must have gone a lot further than he thought, because it was taking a good amount of time to get back to the actual campsite. And it was at that same time that he felt he was being watched. So he picked up the pace a little, and he began to feel the full weight of the situation. He was in the middle of nowhere, not even sure if he was walking the right direction, and he felt like something was following him, closely. He says he started to feel like he was on the verge of tears. He was that terrified. It was then that he heard a branch snap on a tree behind him, causing him to whirl around to see nothing on the ground. But there was certainly something in the trees, something big with pale white skin, and it was incredibly lanky. He didn't remember why, but then he started crying, and he was laughing at the same time. Then the creature began to move toward him, which snapped him out of it and made him scream before he began to run at full pace back through the forest. He didn't dare look back at whatever it was that was chasing him, but he knew it was right behind him, and it was gaining on him at that. He then tripped and fell face first on a rock, immediately blacking out. He woke up with his dad and the Indian family's mother and son standing over him, while the dad looked for whatever had destroyed the trees above. It was sheer evidence that something had been there. All my grandfather said was, "We need to leave. That thing, it's not human." He tried to plead to his great-grandfather to believe him so that they would all leave. He said this so seriously that my great-grandfather knew that he must not have been lying. He wasn't that type of person. The next day, after some explaining, my grandfather learned that what he saw was probably a Wendigo. Now, of course, the Indian family didn't stay long after explaining this, and neither did my family. My grandfather claims this story is 100% true, and I don't see what reason he'd have to make it all up, so I trust him. I completely believe that my grandfather encountered a monster in the Canadian woods. Ghost watching over our couch. Submitted by ItsLeAshton. First off, this story might not be as scary as others, but it is still one of the most frightful things I have ever experienced. I'm a 14-year-old guy named Ashton, and I live in a medium-sized city in British Columbia, Canada, with my mom, dad, younger sister, and maternal grandma. Now, I've never been one to really believe in the paranormal and ghosts and such, but that all changed when we bought an old couch from an estate sale. It was maybe about 6 to 8 years ago. We were out looking for garage sales one day, and we came upon this estate sale in a populated yet creepy neighborhood. My mom basically buys anything vintage or antique, so she had her eye on an antique-ish, maybe 50 to 60-year-old white couch. Keep in mind, this is not a regular garage sale. This is an estate sale, and trust me, that's very relevant. She ended up purchasing it, and we end up borrowing one of my dad's co-workers' trucks and go back up to the house to pick it up later that same day. They bring it home, and it's all okay for the first bit. The first time we noticed something really creepy about it was around 8 months later in early 2010. My sister and I were sitting on that very couch, watching TV with cranberry juice, and I accidentally spilled some of the cranberry juice on the couch. It was a white couch, so that would have stained it if it wasn't treated immediately and carefully. Unfortunately, the stain was never removed. Fast forward a few hours later, I was going downstairs to eat dinner, and as I was walking by the couch, it almost felt like something passed through me at the very moment. I tried to ignore the feeling, but I swear to God, not even 5 seconds later, I heard the sound of the floor creaking 4 or so feet behind me. I stopped, and I turned around. There was nothing and nobody there. I continue making my way, and the rest of the day turns out alright. Maybe about 2 weeks later, I woke up in the middle of the night, maybe 2:30 a.m., because I had heard very light footsteps by the couch. Let me tell you about the layout of the rooms. Mine is separated from everyone else's rooms. My room is right next to the living room, and to get to my parents' room to tell them what was going on, I'd have to walk either through the kitchen or the living room, both of which are right beside each other. After walking through one of those 2 rooms, it would take me to the hallway, and at the end of that hallway are my mom and dad's room and my sister's. My grandma sleeps downstairs. Anyway, basically, if I needed help, I'd be screwed, because I'd still be passing by or through the living room. So I ended up trying to fall back asleep, and surprisingly, sleep came back fast, even though I'm pretty easily scared. Whatever was causing the activity in the house seemed to not pop up at all for the rest of the year. 2011 rolls around, and in about April, and I'm eating toast with raspberry jam on the couch when I accidentally drop a piece of toast on it. My heart dropped as soon as I noticed where it had fallen. It fell dead center onto one of the couch seats. Luckily for me, my mom was able to remove the stain this time around. But unluckily for me, that didn't mean anything different, because about 3 or so days later, someone was in the main bathroom, so I went to the tiny bathroom in my mom and dad's room. The bathroom in their room, though, has always freaked me out. I don't know why. I think one of the reasons is because it's very hard to see into the shower. It doesn't have any curtains, just a glass door. And at the time, I was terrified from the movie Psycho, so that might have been part of the reason. But I still felt more than just scared of that one scene from Psycho, though. It felt almost like I was being watched whenever I was in there. Nothing ever happened, though. The weird thing is, I used to think the ghost was just protective of that couch, which sounds weird, but I think it was protective of the bathroom as well. And weirder yet, the bathroom in my mom and dad's room is the most antique room of the house. The ghost left us alone again until I think June or July, maybe even August of 2013. But later on, one day, I was headed downstairs for supper, and I was walking by the kitchen cupboards, where we stored our glasses and plates. And what happened next still haunts me forever. I kid you not, the cupboard opened suddenly, like someone had opened it angrily. And one of the glasses came flying towards me, towards my head, to be more precise. I ducked, and it shattered all over the floor. At the same time, I screamed, and my mom came rushing up the stairs to see what all the commotion was about. I told her that a glass came flying out of the cupboard towards me. She didn't believe me, as we had been fighting earlier in the day. She assumed I could have been angry and smashed one of the glasses, but once she saw the look on my face, I think she believed me. And we both thought it must have been none other than our friend, the couch ghost. We cleaned up the glass, and eventually we were both able to go downstairs and enjoy our dinner without any other incidents. In August or September of 2014, one of my mom's vintage toys fell down from a shelf and smashed. I happened to be looking at that shelf the exact moment it happened, and it seemed more than just simply falling off. It almost seemed like it was pushed off, and it didn't take a genius to figure out what's up. Nothing else happened since then, up until yesterday. The main bathroom was once again occupied, so that meant I could either go downstairs to my grandma's bathroom or into my mom and dad's bathroom. Of course, silly old me was far too lazy to go downstairs, so I went into my mom and dad's bathroom. It all went fine at first. I did my business, and as I was washing my hands, I saw a greenish orb floating around the room, and I was absolutely terrified. I ran out, closing the door behind me, and I ran back until I was safe in my own room. My parents saw me running through the house and asked what was wrong, but they know I'm scared of that bathroom, and I told them, nothing, I was just afraid. I don't think this will be the last I ever see of this ghost or orb or whatever the heck it was, but the fact that the occurrences are so rare, it really reassures me. We still have that old couch to this day, and we don't plan on moving anytime soon, as we all love this house.